I'm Rich Andreski, Bureau Chief for Public Transportation at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. And I'd like to welcome you to Along the Lines, a podcast series where we'll explore current issues and ideas on Connecticut's public transportation system. Welcome to another episode of Along the Lines. I'm your host, Rich Andreski. In simple terms, we know that more greenhouse gases we put into the atmosphere, the more heat they absorb and the warmer our Earth becomes. And scientists have already identified that a warmer atmosphere has led to an increase in weather-related disasters. It has been said that the atmosphere will hold 7% more moisture per 1 degree Celsius of warming. In today's episode, which is a continuation of our conversation on climate change and its effect on our state, we'll be changing things up a bit with a roundtable format to discuss the vulnerability of our public transportation infrastructure and how to make our vital public transportation systems more resilient in light of a changing climate. We will also discuss how the decision to make a greener commuting choice can help combat climate change. Joining me today are three guests: Kim Lassay, Bureau Chief for Connecticut DOT, Bureau of Policy and Planning; Emily Pish, a Supervising Transportation Planner with Connecticut DOT's Sustainability and Resiliency Unit; and John Trasinski, Director of Resilience Planning with the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, also known as CIRCA. Welcome to the program, all.
Thank you, Rich.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So let's dive in. Kim, let's open with you. You and I get to work together at DOT quite a bit, and I love that. And you are innovating in a number of ways. One of the ways you're sort of changing how we do business is a new focus on sustainability and resiliency. Can you talk a little bit about your initiative there?
Absolutely, Rich, and thank you. I just want to say likewise, it's great to work with you and your wonderful team on a daily basis. I think we have a lot of great karma going on between both of our bureaus, and we're going to accomplish some great things. So, we identified really a need. We were working on some sustainability initiatives within the department, but honestly, those were being shouldered by folks and by units that had many other responsibilities. We were making things happen that needed to happen, but they weren't, concise in one unit. So we really saw a need, and then the governor came out with Executive Orders 1 and 3, which are somewhat related in topics, but have some different asks of state agencies. And at that point, we really decided that we really needed a dedicated unit to look at both of these issues, sustainability and resiliency, which are very broad issues, and to really tackle those for the department. So we decided to stand that up within our Office of Environmental Planning. And we are just absolutely thrilled to have Emily on board. And right now it's a very small unit, but we're hoping to grow it, and they're doing some great things already.
Yeah, Emily, welcome aboard. So great to have you here at DOT. Can you tell us a little bit about your new unit's roles and objectives?
Absolutely, and I'm very excited to be here, Rich. I have to say the vision that's been shown here by our leadership here at DOT has been incredible. Just bringing this program to be. It was created in response to these executive orders that Kim mentioned, but, I have to say, I have to give the folks credit there that they made it happen. They could have just checked a box and said, we're doing our part, but they really are showing that leadership and leading by example in creating this program. We are tasked with achieving some reductions in greenhouse gas generation, reducing our water consumption, and reducing our generation of waste at our facilities and in our operations, which in and of itself is a tall order. We're also tasked with reducing our vulnerability to the impacts of climate change, which means looking at our infrastructure, our facilities, and kind of taking a first pass at just where we are today, which is still ongoing. We're getting an idea of our baseline, measuring our current state, kind of getting an idea of our maturity as an organization, and looking to identify opportunities to work on those vulnerabilities, whether it's through policy, projects that we might implement, or recommend improvements to projects, as well as identify funding that we can bring in. I think we've got a lot of exciting things coming. There's some work that'll be done on electric buses and vehicles, renewable power generation. And, my favorite is on the resiliency side, really looking at some of those infrastructure projects and how we can make things better.
Emily, thanks for that. And, I got to say, working at DOT, there's a real sense of commitment and we're believers in what we do. And that's particularly evident between you and Kim in sort of embracing our new focus on sustainability and resiliency. So glad to get to work with you. Thank you for that. John, I've heard a lot about CIRCA, but perhaps you could take a few minutes to walk us through the mission of CIRCA and your role and how you're working with DOT.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So CIRCA was set up as kind of this partnership between the University of Connecticut and the governor's office at the time and the state agencies. And it was really meant to connect the research capacity of the University of Connecticut to kind of the practical needs for information that would help the towns and the state start to do planning and make decisions about how to respond to climate change. So we're here to sort of help provide information and help stakeholders and state agencies and towns make decisions about how to plan for the future.
Yeah, thank you for that. And John, it's surprising to me. I'm taken aback very often when we seem to have these intense storms now more often. And at times it seems like we don't get the light, steady rainfall anymore. We just have two modes, either a light drizzle or a torrent. So really glad that you're helping us with that, find a way forward because it's highly disruptive. What we've seen with Hurricane Ida that blew through here was significant damage to our rail infrastructure. And these storm events are having an impact on people. In the end, they're disrupting travel. They're damaging our railroad infrastructure and other transportation infrastructure. So what should we at the DOT be focusing on to mitigate these impacts, both the storm events as well as rising sea levels?
Well, that's a big question. One of the things that we have tried to use as a framing for how to tackle this problem is this idea of a zone of shared risk. So thinking about kind of the spatial character of flood risk along the shoreline and adjacent to the rivers and thinking about all the different stakeholders and different land uses within that. And, it really requires a coordination between each of these actors. So we use this idea of a zone of shared risk to sort of get everybody together to think about how can we take a more coordinated approach and engage the local communities and create that sort of that sense of shared investment and shared vision for the future.
Yeah, John, it does seem like an insurmountable, almost overwhelming problem for our state. We're not alone, certainly, but I'm wondering, Kim, you every day sort of bring our attention to discrete problems that we can solve now. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about, how do we engage at this at a meaningful level to begin to effectuate change?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rich. We've been, actually working on this problem, long before we stood up this, this unit that Emily is heading up. We have a great hydraulics and drainage unit within our department that looks at each of our bridges. We're making sure that we're not just passing the flows that we need to today, that they can pass larger flows. We've been making some incremental changes over the years. I'm glad that John mentioned, inland flooding as well. Sometimes we get some unnamed storms or microbursts, that have caused us to have, emergency situations, many years ago before anyone was really talking about climate change or sea level rise. So these have been ongoing problems, and attacking it at the local level.
Kim, I'm sure I'm oversimplifying, but is the idea here that as we rebuild in a way that is more compatible with these intense rainfall events?
Exactly, Rich. And to use some examples that are close to your heart, right? We have some movable bridges along the rail lines. Some of the things that we're looking at is as we're replacing those bridges, making sure the mechanics of those movable bridges are up and out of the floodplain that is predicted, right? John can speak to this much better, right, as far as what we're looking at for the latest data as far as sea level rise. But we are working that into our NEPA documents and taking a forward look as to what we should be planning for.
So, John, what say you to that? We have a vulnerability assessment now. Your organization has produced. What do we know right now about the most vulnerable locations in Connecticut, and what is most at risk at this point?
What we see for Connecticut is that the places that have had challenges with flooding in the past, when we project forward and look at how sea level rise is going to impact those places, what we see is that the frequency of flooding in those places is going up. And it will continue to go up over the next 100 years. The places that have not flooded previously, it depends on the specific local situation, but in general, we see that places that have remained dry in the past, at least in terms of coastal flooding, are likely to stay high and dry in the future. So I think our challenge is to really start to transition away from the places we know have flood risks to places that we know are going to be high and dry in the future, and make smart decisions about adapting the infrastructure that we know is probably going to remain in place, and then thinking about incentivizing development in places that we know are going to be resilient in the future.
John, I'm a layperson when it comes to these types of subjects, and what I've observed is the idea of climate change has gone from something that people thought was decades away to a problem in the here and now. And so, this isn't something that we can pass on to another generation. We have to solve it. We have to figure it out. Is that? Would you agree with that perspective?
Yeah, I would. I would say that the time is now for us to really tackle some of the questions that are difficult. Our estimates and our model projections about when things will start to impact our state are really models and simulations and scientifically informed. But as new data happens, as we have new storms that we've seen this past summer, our understanding of how soon these things are going to happen in Connecticut is going to change. The good news is that, as I said, we do have some things that are working to our advantage in Connecticut, and they are solvable issues, although, there are going to be significant challenges.
No doubt, John. And so I guess I would turn to Emily. Emily, how are you hoping to, weave sustainability and resiliency into our DOT culture and approach? I do want to say that I find my DOT colleagues to always be open to new ideas, but this is a very big change in our thinking and approach to every project. So how are you hoping to implement these initiatives?
That's a great question. I think you hit the nail on the head with culture building. We're looking to change the way we do business, how we put ourselves out there, and really inspiring the staff within DOT to promote these type of projects. And a lot of them already have been. I think no one goes out to build a bridge that won't last, its full lifespan. They want those big pieces of infrastructure that they're designing and constructing to last. And building in these measures of resilience into these projects will ensure that they last. And these projects that are being undertaken today, given that they'll last, 75, 100 years, are going to be inspiring those future generations to want to do those same big projects that have those lasting impacts.
Thanks for that, Emily. Just to build on that point, we're arming our engineers with a little bit more information than we've had before. And really reaching out for different partnerships between Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, as well as CIRCA, to get some better data to our engineers when they're looking at projects. We're trying to flag if they're working on a section of roadway that we think may be at risk. So I think that's also another good first step that we're taking to really, again, get this folded into our cake mix, so to say, of how we look at projects.
Yeah, we all play a role in improving outcomes here, and I'm a believer that change, right, happens not only through policy, but change happens when people feel that they have a way to contribute. And environmental sustainability is something that is increasingly top of mind for many. So I'm really excited to be part of this team and to contribute in whatever way that we can on the public transportation side. I'll just do a little commercial here for public transportation and say that, riding public transportation has always been a green option. You do reduce your carbon footprint when you ride public transportation, but we're increasingly becoming even greener. So we have a number of initiatives underway, and perhaps I could circle back to you a little bit to talk about the electrification of transportation. That is a big initiative at DOT. There's certainly a tie-in with sustainability. But would you like to talk a little bit about, the electrification initiative sort of writ large at DOT?
I certainly can get us started, Rich. We've been excited to work with your team, and along with electrification of our fleets across the state agencies. We're working with some of our other state agencies to get that up and running. Obviously, right, we're working on procurement of more battery electric buses. These are all great things, and yet we also have to have the infrastructure and the charging at our facilities to go along with that. So these are going to take, again, that culture change and really a shift in how we're thinking. And perhaps Emily can follow up a little bit more on some of the details of where we are with that.
Sure. And I think one of the exciting parts of that, Kim, is as we see these electric vehicle chargers be installed at our facilities, people look to them and say, hey, maybe my next vehicle could be an electric vehicle, and really kind of flowing down to the users of those vehicles, to those drivers, and say, well, I tried out the fleet car and the electric vehicle got me where I needed to go. It was a smooth ride, might have been a more pleasant ride than they're accustomed to in a typical internal combustion engine vehicle. And this kind of helps people to see, this is a totally different technology than I'm used to, but I like it. Change is difficult. And I think even people riding those electric buses in the future will kind of get that idea that this is a nice way to ride, and totally different from the old diesel buses, and something that we really hope to see more of as we go forward.
Yeah, exciting times. Definitely a big transition occurring here at DOT and elsewhere. So, John, back to you. We've talked a little bit about policy and the crisis that we're facing. I'm wondering what's your take on the best way to dig ourselves out of this mess that we've created. And when I say we, I do mean the global we. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think on the adaptation side, one of the most important things for people at both the local level and the state level is to really build this understanding of the changing climate and the impacts of a changing climate into how we do investments. So the best thing is to avoid creating future problems that will then be expensive and complicated to fix. We're going to have to take steps to do adaptation, to adapt our existing infrastructure. But one of the most important things we can do is a municipality developing a capital improvement plan, a state agency developing a long-term plan, making sure that we're considering climate change when we spend money and we do planning, so that we can avoid these problems in the future. And I think that's one of the most important steps, is to build it into our existing planning processes and not just see this as an environmental issue. It's, climate change is going to affect every aspect of our lives, from our health to where we work, how we get to work, where we live. So just kind of building that into our planning going forward, I think, is one of the most important things we could do on the adaptation side.
I think those are all great points, John. I think one of the challenges that we have, Rich, sometimes is this is a big topic, right? It's actually kind of scary when you really think about it and you look at some of these models. And I think sometimes when we see something that just seems so overwhelming, we feel helpless, right? We feel like there's absolutely nothing that I can do. It's too late, and we just kind of put it out of our mind. But I do think that there's an awful lot that people can do if we can get a culture change out there where people truly think about the carbon footprint of their purchases, in their everyday actions. It's never too late to still make a difference. When you plan your trips, can you get a whole bunch of errands done in one day, instead of running out and doing multiple trips? Can you carpool? Does your neighbor need something while you're out? I think those are all things that feel like they might be insignificant, but if we were all doing them, it could certainly make a change. And I know that you already put the plug in, Rich, for riding public transit, which of course is a real big one. So we're excited, to continue to work with your bureau to make sure that people have good choices going forward.
Kim, well said. Even work from home as a trend is potentially reducing VMT on our highways, and so yeah, there's a lot of small things that can be done which add up to big results. And anyone that knows me knows that I also do love space, and I love following the trends in commercial space flight. And one argument is that, well, those are high carbon emitting activities. But another perspective on it is that the folks that have gone up there and seen the Earth and how fragile our planet is, here in the blackness of space, there's really nowhere else to go. And we're on this really small spaceship that's traveling through our galaxy. And this is it. You go 50 miles vertical and it's emptiness and the vacuum of space. And so we really have to be careful here. This is not a trivial matter. The ability for us to exist. And actually, I think sometimes people think that, well, geez, life is resilient and there's nothing we can do to really jeopardize our existence. And what I would say to that is, it's really not necessarily strictly about existing. It's about, do we want a quality of life? Do we want safety and security, food security? Do we want to have a vibrant, rich culture and a diversity of life on Earth? And I know those are really big ideas, but that's what's at risk here. It's not strictly about surviving. It's about having a nice quality of life, and all the things that we enjoy. We want to protect and make sure that those are there for future generations. So lots of big ideas here. Folks may not even know where to start. And so we'll go from that really big idea. And I think a lot of folks are motivated to try to contribute. We do have some ways that folks can do that. I'm going to plug CT Rides as one of those options. So if you're out there listening and you want to figure out, how do I start to make a difference? Well, you certainly can make differences in your own household, right? And CT Rides is a service that the DOT offers. CTRides.com. Go to the website, find out the options for green commuting, other ways to reduce, your use of your own vehicle for everyday trips. We will, through that service, match you up with carpooling partners. We have, access to all the public transportation options through that website. Go check it out. We do campaigns every year to challenge people to get out of their cars and use public transportation, or use bicycling or other active transportation to get around. So just a quick plug on that. So could the three of you maybe talk a little bit about public opinion, what you're seeing in terms of the shifting of attitudes and how we move forward?
All the things that you just spoke about, right? We are all on one rock spinning here in space. And it's an incredible, beautiful place, right? And sea level rise and the issues that we're seeing are impacting, other species. They're impacting other cultures. We may have whole cultures, that are wiped out. When you look at some of these island communities and coastal communities, there's some scary things happening, all over the world. This needs to be an effort that everyone is involved in. And there's no action that's too small. And I would say there's also, no action that's too great as far as how we tackle this.
So who wants to go? John, do you want to give us your
Sure.
take?
I guess there's two concepts that come to my mind. One, change is inevitable, and there's always this I think bias towards keeping things as they are. But change is going to happen, and it's really about whether we want to react to that in a haphazard, disorganized way, or whether we want to sort of face these issues and try to create a vision for the future that isn't all doom and gloom. And the other thing is that, doing nothing has costs. It's going to be expensive to change our energy and transportation infrastructure, but not changing that is going to have major costs as well. We can move beyond this sense that we're arguing about whether a problem exists, and we can get to a discussion of, what are some good solutions.
Having these type of conversations actually gives me hope. I think in the past I might have said, it was a bit more of a darker outlook on things, that it was inevitable, that we could not change. But now a lot is being done to make these gradual changes. And I think if we together keep taking one step at a time every day and moving forward, we can see some of these changes and hope to stop some of these great impacts that are predicted.
Emily, really well said. I love the business that the 3 or 4 of us are in here, which is really about public service, right? We're here to serve the public, to anticipate problems and fix problems. And that is really increasingly top of mind, right? That climate change doesn't, although it doesn't discriminate between party, it sometimes discriminates based on income levels and housing location. And so I wonder if we could touch on equity as we begin to wrap up this conversation. How does climate affect people maybe at different income levels differently? And what can we do about that to improve outcomes for everyone?
Yeah, that's a great point, Rich. I'll jump in here. Obviously air quality, is something that is all a part of this bigger picture here that we haven't touched too much on. And obviously Connecticut, for a lot of reasons, one of which is simply the way that the wind blows. We do not have the greatest air quality here in Connecticut. We get some pollution coming in from the west, and yet there are still things that we can do. Again, right, it's kind of our common theme here, that's not a reason to give up. And so we're always looking for ways that we can improve our air quality. And again, mostly in our cities, we definitely, see greater instances of asthma and other breathing difficulties with folks that are in the inner city. So anything we can do to help there, it's all tied together.
You can't really talk about climate change impacts without talking about equity, because, we have this history in Connecticut and across the country that we have to grapple with. And we have these disparities in health outcomes and this legacy of racism and discrimination. And, it's clear that in Connecticut, we have legacies of pollution, a lack of political power for decision making on land uses that has resulted in sort of this problems with inequalities in Connecticut. And it's clear that there are vulnerable communities in Connecticut that are going to be more impacted, especially when we talk about heat and health impacts. And these communities are hungry to be involved in the decision-making process and the planning process early, and to have a real voice and seat at the table. And, we all need to look to our planning processes and try to design ways to make those more inclusive and more representative of the communities where we work.
And I think as public servants, you touched earlier upon that, we're public servants here, and our job is to serve the public, all of the public, not just one group of people, not just the neighborhoods that can afford it, but all of these neighborhoods that we might impact with these projects. And as we plan for these changes, we need to consider that there have been damages done in the past. There have been impacts to neighborhoods that have been done through our work that we can remedy. We have a great opportunity to remedy some of those harms done. We can make improvements, be it through reducing urban heat islands, improving our public transportation, things like that. And I think it's up to us to ask people what would be the most benefit.
So I really enjoyed this conversation. I want to make a couple of closing thoughts and then just perhaps turn it back to the three of you for a closing comment. One is at the Connecticut DOT, we are about to initiate a statewide outreach to our residents and current transit riders to ask them about the future of public transportation, where they would like to see investment. This will be happening in the course of the next 12 months. I would encourage our listeners to tune in and stay tuned for that. There's an opportunity here to really shape the future of public transportation 10 years and beyond. So definitely a tie into sustainability. We hope all of our listeners will get involved. And sustainability is really not something that we do on the side. It is really to the core of how we develop and conceive projects. And I'm really excited that the three of you are leading the charge for the state. Couldn't imagine three better people to do that. And I'd like to just hand it back to the three of you for a closing thought or two. So first, let's go start with you, Emily.
Well, I'd like to thank you for having me today. I think one of the biggest takeaways I have from this is that we have a bright future. I'm given a lot of hope and a lot of positive thoughts for the future. I think Kim mentioned earlier karma. I think we're all, contributing our good karma and hoping to grow that.
Thank you, Emily. John, how about you?
Yeah, first, just thanks for including me in this discussion today, Rich. And I guess I would just say that, we have significant challenges in Connecticut, but we have a lot of capacity in terms of people and we, I think, have the means to respond to this challenge. And we just have to get to the work of getting organized. Many towns have resiliency committees or committees that are starting to get folks organized to take on climate issues. And if you don't have one, you can reach out to your political leadership and start to get them on board with getting some local folks together to start to get organized around this. And we're going to need all the help we can get.
John, I'm so glad you could make the time to be with us this morning. Thank you again. And Kim, over to you.
Thanks, Rich. Hard to follow both of those wrap-ups, but just a great conversation here. And I think we've mentioned hope a couple times here. I like to say that with hope, the impossible can become achievable. So I think we all just have to, dig in and do the hard work and keep at it. And I would challenge all of our listeners, to get out there and do your part. If you're not sure what that part may be, there's lots of resources out there that can give you some ideas. There's lots of ways to be involved in our communities and really get some of these conversations going because it's going to take all of us.
Kim, that's a fantastic way to wrap up this podcast. I want to thank all three of you, Kim Lassay, Emily Pish from the Connecticut Department of Transportation, and John Trasinski from the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation. Again, remember, you can find previous episodes of Along the Lines on your favorite podcast platform, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud. I'm Rich Andreski. Join us next time for another episode of Along the Lines. Thanks for listening to this episode of Along the Lines. This is your host, Rich Andreski. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please remember to subscribe and share.